There we go. Very important. All right. Welcome everyone here to our class, Planting and Caring for Your Vegetable Garden. Um, we're right at the beginning of our season where we can start to put our vegetables in the ground. And so this class is absolutely at the right time. And as always, and we're all very familiar with sort of the Zoom rules, but today we'll go over them really quickly anyway. We appreciate if you would keep your microphone muted during the presentation. Ideally, you can keep your video off. It's not quite as critical. It's a little bit distracting, and it can be rough if we're having any problems with connectivity. So,
Denise, may
yeah.
I ask you to put it on the slideshow so you're on the second slide?
Did it not do that, huh?
Nope.
Okay, well, shucks. Let's see what we can do with that. It is so on slideshow. I'm going to unshare for a second and reshare, see if we can get that to work correctly. We certainly want this to look the right way. Let's see if this one works.
I bet that's going to work.
Let's see. All right, are we on?
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, who knows? Technical stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, despite the fact that I'm the one that's supposed to be able to figure this out for you. Anyway, so microphone muted, video off as much as we can. Usually the best way to get your best view is to use speaker view, but it's up to you on what you'd like to do on that. We use the chat for questions, and we'll answer those at the end of the program so it doesn't distract us too much as we're going along. Please feel free to put a question in there anytime at all. It's absolutely fine. We have people here to keep track of them, and we'll just keep them until we're ready to answer them at the end, so we can put them all together. There is a closed caption button that's set up down near the bottom if you'd like those closed captions. It looks a little bit like that little CC thing. As I said, I'm your technical assistance person, so check in with me if you're having any problem. I'm guessing since we haven't heard anything yet that everybody's doing okay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending the video to you, or actually a link to the video to you, for you, and as the presentation, all the slides as well. Those reaction buttons down at the bottom of your screen are really helpful if you want to raise your hand, although again, once we get to the questions, we'll be able to kind of work around that in the best way we can to make it work for everybody. So I believe that those are all the background things you need to worry about, and I'm going to go ahead and we'll move on. There we go, Trink.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. I'm Trink Praxel. You'll hear more about me later. But I just want to give this slide to tell you that we are the UC Master Gardeners, and we're part of Cooperative Extension or University of California Natural and Agricultural Resources. So we are part of the University of California. We are trained by university faculty pretty intensively, and then we extend research-based knowledge. So our aim is really to give you knowledge that the university has researched and that is relevant to home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable practices. So focus particularly at all of us, the home gardeners. Okay, next slide. And so here we are. I'm Trink, and you'll meet Christina in a minute. I've been a master gardener since 2012. I've been gardening for 25, 30 years, and not really sure. I grow vegetables in 4 large raised beds, and I've got about 5 fruit trees, and I really like to share what I know, which is not everything, but I love to share it with other home gardeners. Christina?
I'm Christina Graham. I've been a master gardener since 2018. I've been gardening for off and on for 20 years or more. I love growing vegetables, and I kind of grow them everywhere. This year I'm trying to grow more in ground, but I already have raised beds and containers. And one of my favorite things is trying new things, like this year trying to battle the gophers for the actual ground. We'll see how it goes.
It's good. Next slide.
So the first thing we wanted to do was thank you for joining us, and we would love to hear a little bit about what you're hoping to learn. We have the main materials already planned, obviously, but there will be time at the end for questions, as well as we have an in-person class on Saturday, and we would love to know more about your interests so that we can better prepare for those. So in chat, if you wouldn't mind, we would love to hear about what you're hoping to learn. I put some sample example answers up on the screen, but you can say whatever it is that you're hoping to learn.
Okay, anybody? Oh, there we go.
Those are some interesting ideas. Yeah, these are great topics. And we will have a chance to talk more about them during the time at the end. We still have another minute, so feel free to keep putting them in there. If there's anything we don't get to, feel free to ask it specifically. Some of these, I think, will come up of what I'm seeing so far.
Sorry,
Some
really
of
building energy. Some of these are also the ones about pests. As many of you know, this is the second of a 4-part vegetable gardening series. And actually our third one, I think it's actually 5 parts now that I think about it. Anyway, our next one, which is really only next month soon, we're going to focus on pests. So we can talk about some of these things that you may be experiencing now, but for more in-depth, I'd recommend you sign up for the 3rd class, which is the next. Okay, all good stuff.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah. Good gardening questions.
Yeah, these are all excellent questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to go to the next slide.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the goal of this class is for you to know how to plant your vegetables from either seeds or starts, and then care for them to a healthy maturity. And we will try to cover some of those other topics you all brought up. I think we can go to the next slide. Oh, I meant to say, we will be sending a copy of these slides to you, and there are links in the slides. So we're going to try to send those out within a week. Fingers crossed. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're going to actually start out with a little bit of a review from session 1. I noticed in the questions, a few of you asked questions related to some of the things, and also some of the topics are really good jumping off points for what we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So the first thing we wanted to review really quickly are considerations before you plant in terms of where you plant them. So in the last class, the instructors shared detailed information about important considerations when planning and setting up your garden. And the blue link right under the title in each of this slide and the next couple of slides is the link to the slides from the last class. So if you're like, oh, I want to know more about that topic, click that link when you get these slides, and you can get their whole slide presentation as well that goes into some really wonderful detail. The first thing I wanted to say is that when you're deciding where you're going to put your plants, make sure that you look at the daylight, the direct sunlight available. 6 to 8 hours of sunlight is needed for most vegetables, especially summer vegetable crops. And it's important to know how many hours your garden is getting per day and how that changes throughout the year. In general, any plant where you harvest the fruit, so that includes things like tomatoes and peppers and corn, are going to want the most sun. And then if you have some areas that don't get quite as much sun, you can usually get away with the crops that you primarily eat the leaves, like lettuce and kale, or the roots like radishes and beets, in those areas with a little less sun. However, the amount of sun will still affect the performance of all vegetables and crops because it's, of course, how they eat, right, is photosynthesis. So sunlight's really important. The next thing that is important to think about when you're looking at where you're going to plant is level ground. And that's important for two main reasons. The biggest reason is water. When you water, if it's not level, the water has trouble sinking in. And then related to that, an issue is if you're planting seeds, especially ones that go right on the surface, like carrots, the water can carry away those small seeds, and then they end up in a big clump instead of in your nice like formation that you planted them in. So taking a little time to make sure it's relatively level will be helpful. The next thing you want to think about is water, and we're going to have a whole section on water later on, but in terms of thinking about where you're going to plant, you want to think about how you are going to get water to your plant. In California, we don't get a lot of rain, and vegetables generally need more water than we have naturally. And so you want to have some sort of source of water that is accessible for you with your resources, with your strength and whatever you're going to put in, the amount of time you have, etc. And like I said, Trink will actually go into that a little bit more later. And then the next thing related to the idea of access is how easily you can access the crops themselves. You will generally want to access your crops frequently for two reasons. Number one is if they are susceptible to problems and you really want to keep an eye on them because you want to make sure that they're not having problems. And then the other reason is if they're the kind of crop that you harvest frequently. And so those kind of crops you want to have close to where you can see them all the time and access them really easily. And then if there's some areas of your garden that are a little harder to get to, those you might want to think of your hardier plants that are less susceptible, and also your plants that maybe the harvest comes all at once and you just have to get out there to get it all at once. And an example of that from my own yard is, I mentioned I love growing garlic, but I get aphids on my garlic. And so I actually planted them along a path that I walk down every day so that instead of waiting, like every day, I just look for them and I deal with them. But then I have gooseberries, which I don't even like. My niece likes them and my daughter likes them. And those I kind of tuck away by a back fence where they can get to them, but I don't. Doesn't matter if I don't see them. And then the last thing,
Christina, I would add to that yes, as we talk about pests in the next session, we really tell you, go out and look at your plants every day. So you're right, easily accessible.
They are much easier to deal with if you deal with them immediately rather than waiting a week or more. So totally important. And then the last one I think applies to some people more than others. It just depends on where you are. But wind is a type of damage that a lot of times people don't think about until their plants are in place. If you have a really windy area of your yard, that can damage plants. And so thinking about where to place them so they're not as susceptible or how to break the wind a little bit can be important. Next slide, please. This slide alone could be probably an entire semester long class, which we are not going to do tonight. But I do want to say there are a ton of resources in the slides that, again, are linked in this slide if you want to start digging into it a little bit more. So one of the things you want to think about is what are you going to plant in? What is holding the soil? Is it just the ground? You're going to plant in the ground around you. Do you have raised beds? Do you have some sort of containers? The table on the screen is from the previous class. And really the sky is the limit for what you can plant in, but each choice has pros and cons that are important to consider. So if you go through the slides from the previous class, they're going to go into a lot of depth on planting space and materials. Those elements can have a pretty big impact on what you plant and how you have to care for them in the future in terms of like what size they are, how much soil they hold, and then also like the water retention in there. But again, that's about as much depth as I can go into for this class because it's not our focus. Next slide, please. So we're just curious. We're going to put up a poll, I believe. And we're just curious, are you thinking that you're going to grow in ground, in raised beds, in containers, some sort of combination, or are we not sure?
Sorry, we had a little bit of a miscommunication. So how about we go ahead and put that in the chat?
That sounds great.
That's a good idea. Yes.
All righty, there we go.
So tell us in the chat what containers, there you go. Great. Raised beds, raised beds.
Good. I'm seeing a lot of raised beds,
That's
containers.
terrific. Containers, okay.
Yes.
All three. Okay.
Yeah. And it's
Okay.
fine to not be sure. Like I said, when you get the slides, you can look at the other slides and they have a lot of information. I put that table because I found it really a nice way to compare, but you can really go into some depth on that.
And then
I think I
there's
mentioned at the
all
beginning.
kinds of raised beds and all kinds of containers. And if hopefully some of you or many of you are coming to the demo on Saturday, because we can also look at our own demonstration garden in Watsonville and talk about the containers and raised beds that are there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wine barrels. That's fun. Screened in garden box.
Wine barrels, yes.
Those sound fantastic.
Okay, let's go on.
Do we go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
I think we've gotten a lot of responses.
Yep.
I put timers in just so we didn't go too long, but I think it seems like most of you responded.
Yeah.
So we can go to the next slide. All right. So since we're having such beautiful weather, our first topic is related to getting out there and actually planting. Go ahead and switch the slide again, please. So before you plant, you have to decide what you're going to plant. So when choosing your plants, it's a good idea to start by thinking about what you like and what you purchase when you buy your groceries. A lot of gardeners start thinking about trying to plant something because they hear that it's easy. But that is not what I recommend, because some of the things that are easy to grow, you might not like. And for example, I don't really like beets. They taste like dirt to me, and I don't want a mouthful of dirt, but they are easy to grow. And we've all heard stories about people ding dong ditching zucchini because they grow too much zucchini and they like don't know what to do with it. So if you like beets, grow beets. If you like zucchini, grow zucchini. But I really recommend that when you are choosing your plants to grow, you really think about, what do you love to eat? What does your family love to eat? And focus on that. If you love tomatoes, try a couple of different varieties of tomatoes. If you love zucchini, grow zucchini. But go with what you think you'll actually use. The other thing to think about is the time of year. Now, in the planning section, which was the last class in March, they talked a little bit more about frost and planting zone, and those are important, and you can easily find that information online. It's not really going to be our focus right now because we're really past our frost dates for this year if you're in this area. But you might want to make a note to look it up for the future. And I think in a later slide, I actually have the USDA map linked somewhere in there. But what I want you to focus on when you're thinking about what to plant right now is thinking about the season. So generally vegetable crops are divided into warm season crops and cool season crops. Technically in the Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz kind of area, we actually have such a mild climate that we can get away with planting things that are out of season. But if you're a beginner, it's not necessarily the best way to set yourself up for success, just because they are a little more tricky. So right now we're heading into the warm season. And so I would recommend that you mostly focus on warm season veggies. Cilantro, for example, is a cool season herb. And so you can grow it right now, but it is likely to bolt more quickly than if you grow it in the cool season. Whereas basil is a warm season crop, and that is likely to do really well. Similarly, broccoli, it's a little late for unless you've already got it in the ground. It will also bolt pretty quickly with the heat, but tomatoes and peppers you can plant right now. And so I just want to make a note that like when you go to a nursery to buy starts or to buy seeds, you can probably find cool season crops, and there's nothing wrong with experimenting. We just don't recommend them because they're not really as meant for this season. And so it's just a little bit riskier. So as long as you're, plant what you want, but as long as you're aware that those are harder to succeed right now, that is fine. Next slide, please. All right. The next thing you want to think about is whether you want to start from seeds or starts or a combination of both of them. Both seeds and starts have their place in the garden, and they both have pros and cons. In general, I would say that starts are generally considered to be more beginner friendly, but that doesn't necessarily mean you only have to choose starts if you're new to gardening. Seeds actually have many advantages. They're small, they're easy to ship. You can often get more varieties of the plants for less expense if you choose. You often get way more seeds than you need, which could be a downside because then you have to figure out how to store them, but it also could be a benefit if you're sharing them with your neighbors. Another advantage of seeds is that you can plan the timing of your plants. So you have more control over when you put them in the garden and when your harvest is ultimately going to be ready. But they do take a little more time and require more attention than starts. Most seeds do not tolerate drying out in the early stages of development, and they are more susceptible to pests when they're very young. Furthermore, certain plants are sensitive to transplants, so starting the seed in the soil where they'll stay is your best bet for a healthy plant that's susceptible. Like anything with a taproot is generally going to be a little more susceptible to transplant shock and damage. So for example, sunflowers, you absolutely can transplant them. They generally don't grow as big as if you just start them in place from seed. Same with carrots. I've heard master gardeners say that they plant them from starts. It's trickier to get them to grow successfully. Like I don't do it. It's possible. I don't recommend it, especially for somebody who's a beginner. Starts are generally considered more beginner friendly because they are already past the most delicate stages of their development. But that's not their only advantage. They also save you a lot of time because they're generally ready to put in the ground as soon as you bring them home. And also you can buy exactly what you need right now and not have to worry about storing the extras. And so that's one of the things, like you can see from the screen, that plant that's that side, that looks like a tomato, I'm pretty sure. You could just pop that in the ground right now and it would probably be fine if you took care of it, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. The one thing I will say, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what to look for later, that's kind of one of the, for the UCANR that they list as a pro of seeds, is that because you're not bringing home soil with the seeds, they are a little less likely to bring home pathogens, to bring home any sort of disease or pests. Whereas with a start, there is soil with it, which could technically carry something. Usually, if you check it out and it looks healthy, it's probably okay. I don't know a lot of people that have problems with it, but that is one thing we have listed in our articles. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of looking at quality, which I was just talking about a little bit, for seeds, any seed that you buy now should have a label indicating that they were packaged for 2025. If it's not labeled for 2025, you should definitely be getting a discount because the longer that seeds sit around, it affects their germination. You also want to make sure you buy seeds that are stored in a dry place out of direct sun. So if you see an outdoor display of seeds, that actually might not be your best bet because they want to stay dry and kind of in a controlled temperature, sealed up away from the sun, to be higher quality seeds to get the best germination. With starts, I don't know about you, Trink, but I always like kind of pull it out of the container a little bit and check out the check out the roots. Do you do that too?
Well, and especially like the small ones, like the one just on the previous page, you can easily usually pull them out and see whether they're root bound. And sometimes you, especially as you get further into the season, you can pick up starts that I've been in their little containers for too long. So yeah.
And that's the biggest issue is if it's like a cup, a white cup when you pull it out and it's just like roots wrapped around, I might take a pass on that one. You do want to be able to see roots. Like a good start, there will be enough root matter to kind of hold the soil together. Like it's normal to be able to pull it out and all the soil just basically stays with the plant. That's completely normal. But if you're only seeing roots, that's probably going to have a tougher time going into your ground. And similarly, I would recommend staying away from fruit that already is plants that are already forming the fruit. So if it's in the nursery and it's got a tomato on it, it may have been in that pot a little too long. Your best bet is actually just looking at the stems and the branching and the leaves and just looking at to see that those look really healthy rather than looking for active fruit on there.
Great.
Next slide, please. All right. So I mentioned we are in the warm season. So you want to think about warm season crops, and that can also help you decide, once you decide what you want, whether you should go with seeds or starts. And linked at the bottom of this slide, there's, I think I mentioned earlier, the USDA hardiness zone map, but also there's a UC A&R planting guide that could be really helpful if you want to look beyond just these. This slide has a couple of common examples of the kinds of things that people often are planting. So tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and gourds, we recommend if you're putting them in the ground right now, that you do that with a start rather than seed. And the reason is that they just have a long date to maturity. And so if you put the seed in right now, you risk not getting a full harvest by the time the season's kind of ending. And so for those, we recommend that you just get starts and transplant them. Crops like beans, beets, corn, radishes, potatoes, those you can directly seed. Corn is another one that sometimes has some transplant shock, and that's part of why direct seeding them is a good idea. And then there's a lot of plants you can do either. So cucumber and both winter and summer squash, you can get starts or you can seed, and both of them can go in the ground right now. In fact, with those kind of crops, a lot of people will do a combination, because if you plant starts and seeds, the starts will probably be ready for harvest earlier, but then the ones that come from seed, you'll get a later harvest, so you extend your harvest a little bit, which can be nice as you're getting close to the end of your season.
Christina, can I add a comment here? Is that
absolutely.
And this is especially true for those of us that are here over in Monterey Bay, that we're cool enough that we can grow. I mean, we're so cool. Our weather is so cool that we can grow kale, lettuce, what else am I thinking? Other leafy greens like that in a kind of maybe a little section of the garden that isn't quite as sunny as some other sections. So you have to kind of learn your environment and what will work best in which sections of your garden. But I have lettuce and kale and things like that, almost all year long here.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about if you're growing things out of season is pests, because I can grow kale, but it gets aphids real fast at my
Yeah.
house. So just thinking about like placing it, if you are going to grow it out of season, place it in a place where you can pay more attention to it and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That is a good point. Thank you. Next slide. So these are technically not veggies, but I thought they were worth putting up there to just acknowledge that your vegetable garden doesn't have to be just vegetables. So a lot of people like to mix in flowers and herbs, and that can really benefit your garden for in a variety of ways. Many gardeners find that their vegetables grow more successfully when they mix the type of plants in part because it can lure in pollinators and other beneficial insects. And for some of them, they also potentially ward off pests. So if you're interested in planting herbs and flowers in your veggie garden, you can see some recommendations on the slide about transplants and versus direct seeding for the time of year. And again, it comes down to largely the time from seed to maturity. So rosemary, for example, has a long date from seed to maturity, whereas a sunflower doesn't. And so that's a lot of times what that difference is. Next slide, please. So this was also covered by the previous group a month ago. But it is useful to think about looking at the seed packet when you're deciding what to grow. Some seed packets will actually just directly tell you warm season or cool season, but even if they don't, they'll usually give you a planting window. And so you can look at that planting window and say, like, am I in that planting window? We have this one is a broccoli Rob. Is that Rob? Is that how you say that? To be honest, I don't.
That's how I say it.
I'm never quite sure. But which I wouldn't grow in my garden right now. We just have it as our example. But the thing I want to say about seed packets really quickly is that the information will vary really significantly based on the company because they just decide what's going to be useful to their particular customers. But I do recommend looking at the basic sections that are recommendations in terms of dates, seed depth, and seed spacing. They will also give you an idea of days to germinate and days to harvest, which can help you plan like when to keep an eye on it to make sure it's coming up, possibly when to protect it. If you're worried about pests getting to it either as it's springing up or as the harvest is ready. Next slide, please. Thank you. Similarly, if you buy starts, they often come with labels, and those labels also can vary greatly from company to company. One of the things I highly recommend is that if your plant comes with a tag, you keep the tag with the plant when you transplant it so that you can more easily keep track of what it is. Almost all of the plant tags will tell you the variety. They will usually give you information about sun requirements, spacing, and mature size. They may not give you a days to harvest, though. That's like hit or miss depending on the company, but still worth keeping. Next slide, please. All right, when you're ready to actually plant, and I linked an article that I thought was helpful from ANR at the top of this slide, Agricultural and Natural Resources at the top of the slide. But there are some basic tasks you want to do to prepare your soil. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your soil is moist and it has already been amended. Amending the soil was covered, I think, in some depth in March. So you can go back to those March slides to look more at amending, but that's usually going to be adding a bunch of compost, just to put it in shorthand. In terms of moisture, you don't want your soil like muddy or standing water. If you work in muddy soil, you can actually do some negative things with the soil structure. But you don't want it to be bone dry either. Think of it kind of like a sponge. Like you want a sponge where you can squeeze it and it's definitely wet, but it's not dripping. And part of the reason you want that is because when you put your seed in or your start in the soil, it's going to want to continue to access water. And if the soil is really dry, it'll actually pull water away from the seed or the start, which is harmful to them. You don't want that. And yes, you absolutely can water after, but it's helpful if the water has already soaked in before. I recommend, and Trink, I don't know if you agree with this, I recommend actually watering it maybe the night before and then coming and checking it once it's had a chance to soak in.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, so then once your soil is amended and moistened, you are ready to plant. When you're planting your seeds, you really don't need anything fancy. I literally just poke my finger into whatever the planting depth is. If I'm planting only a few seeds, I use one finger. If I'm planting a bunch of seeds, I'll run my finger across and make a little furrow at the depth that's recommending, and then I drop my seeds in at the spacing recommended by the seed packet. If you are planting a start, you'll want to dig a hole that is about 2 inches less deep than the soil in the container and about twice as wide. Those are the official UCA in our recommendation. And the goal is for once you've put the start into the soil and gotten the rest of the soil back in place around it, that the crown or kind of the soil level from the original plant is basically at or slightly above the ground that you're planting it in or the soil that you're planting it in. You don't want it lower in general, and you don't want it too much higher either. You're shooting for it to be like pretty even or maybe just slightly above. And the reason we say slightly above is a lot of times because you've been disturbing the soil, it might sink a little bit. So having it just a hair above will allow for that sinking, and then it's still at the level. There are some plants that'll tolerate being planted deeper. So tomatoes is, I think, the one that most people talk about, but it's not really necessary. And so as a general rule of thumb, your goal is to keep it at the same level.
And that does kind of depend on the tomato plant itself. Like if it's gotten taller and thinner and spindly, then maybe you would want to plant it a little deeper. But yeah, I think that's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're worried about the stem is thin and you're worried about it breaking, then sure, plant it deeper. It's not going to hurt it. But yeah. And then, I did want to say labeling. Make sure that you label your plant. So if your plant came with a label, then you're in luck. Just make sure you stick your label in the ground. In terms of if it didn't come with one, you can make your own. At a minimum, if I'm making my own, I recommend putting the variety and the date that you planted it on the label. Master gardeners, we generally use like those white plastic labels that you can find everywhere, and we actually use pencil to write on it because it's not really water soluble. You can go online and find lots of people talking about what they love to label with. That's the only thing that I found that actually like stays for the entire season. Like I've experimented with that or metal, the metal that you like etch into with a pen or pencil, that also stays for the entire season. I haven't had good luck with wood ones. Wooden and bamboo ones, they sometimes mold, and then that's harmful to the plant. I don't know, Trink, have you used anything else?
Nope. I usually use little plastic things, but it's also ink. Ink will just like disappear over the season. So yeah, pencil is a good, experiment with different things, and do label. I mean, I just have to tell a story that about a week ago, I put some seeds in the ground, and before I came in the house, I thought, I have to put a label there. And now I'm looking at them going, what did I plant there? So it happens to all of us. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Marla has a suggestion in the chat too. So you guys can look up, you guys can give each other suggestions too.
Yeah, that's a good one. A friend gave me some metal blinds cut up. That's a great idea.
That is a good idea.
Okay.
I think we can go on to the next slide. Okay. So the next thing to think about, because it is easier on the plant root structure to do it at the same time as the planting, is thinking about support and protection. So I'm going to talk about support first and then protection afterwards. So certain plants really need support. Vining peas, vining beans really want to grow up something. Tomatoes want some sort of support. Squashes and cucumbers really appreciate growing up off the soil. It helps with pest control. Can you grow any of these on the ground? Yes, but they tend to struggle a little bit more if they're left on the ground. And so totally lost my place in my notes. So I was just gonna say really quickly, in terms of options, there are a ton of options. You guys probably have ideas that you can throw in the chat if you would like as well. But choose what's gonna work with your space and with your budget. So you can use little bamboo tripods, like the bottom picture on the slide right there is basically wooden stakes, I believe, on the ends and across the top, and then bamboo poles that the plants can actually climb up. I've done, when I grew things along a fence, I put a wire across the top of the fence and then just drop down twine to the base of the plant. The top picture is actually from my front yard. We got these decorative ones because it's the front yard, it's right along the driveway. And then the peas can grow up the decorative metal. There are lots of images online of people having those trellises over a walkway that then they grow plants over. That can be really successful. When you are deciding what kind of structure you're going to put where, really think about the size of the mature plant and also think about the weight of the mature fruit. So peas, for example, are very lightweight. Bamboo is more than sufficient for that. The wire with the what's it called, with the twine hanging down is fine for peas and beans. But pumpkins, maybe not, right? So pumpkins are where something a little heavier duty might work. In fact, I've found that most of the tomato cages that you find in in any store that sells them, are not sturdy enough for big tomatoes in my yard, but they work great for peppers. So a lot of times I'll take tomato cages and stick them around peppers to give them that extra support so their branches don't break. But then I usually do something else for my tomatoes, something a little heavier duty. So you just want to think about, like, even within tomatoes, if you're growing cherry tomatoes, those are not as heavy. If you're growing big beefsteak tomatoes, those are really heavy. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that?
Nope.
You're good. Okay. Next slide. So for both the support and also protecting the plants, it's great to put anything you're going to do in place as you're planting, because when you plant them, you know where the roots are because you just put them there. And if you add it later, it could be fine, but you might also be disturbing the roots. And that's why getting it in right then when you're planting is helpful. The next thing you want to think about is protecting your plants. Birds, bunnies, bugs love seedlings. And so that's why you want to think about it right when you're planting, because a lot of times when you're planting it is the time that it's going to be most susceptible. They're tender, they're appealing. And on top of that, because they're smaller, they may not be strong enough to survive an attack or some munching of a local critter. When you are figuring out what you're going to use to protect, you want to think about what are you protecting them from. And I can see in the chat already coming up with some specific ideas of things you're trying to protect from. The reason you want to think about what you're protecting from is because your protection will look very different. Now, both of these pictures are actually from my yard. I took them yesterday, so apologies for the weeds. My backyard is just covered with weeds right now. But in the top picture, there's 4 stakes, which is a really ugly orange rope wrapped around it. And that's because one of the things I'm protecting them from is my family, is that I planted some corn and I am worried that someone will go and just walk over them, because honestly, when corn is young, it does just look like a weed and it just blends in with the rest of the weeds in my backyard. And then in addition to the 4 posts with the ugly with the ugly rope around it, there's some cloches in the foreground, and that's to protect the smaller ones from squirrels that I have in my yard. And the bottom picture similarly are little pop-up tents that somebody got me for Christmas. That I think they're from Amazon, but you can probably find them anywhere. And that was actually a picture from a while ago. That's garlic. There's garlic both in the ground and also in those pots. And the garlic will be fine once it's established, but when it's young, it can easily get dug up. And so you want to think about what is going to protect them from your particular critters, because protecting from birds is a little different from protecting them from squirrels, which is different from protecting them from gophers, which is different from protecting them from my teenagers. The other thing you want to think about is how long you're going to need it. So the ugly rope and stakes will probably come down in the next week or so, because they'll be big enough to be noticeable in the next week or so. And so I don't mind that it's real ugly. If it's something that's going to stay for longer, then you might want to think about how easy is it to get in there to water? How easy is it to get in there to weed? How easy is it to move from place to place? Do you have a place to store it when it's not in use? Because planting seedlings is one of the times you'll need it. But if you're talking about certain crops, it can also be at the time of harvest. Like those blueberries, as soon as they are ripe, there are critters that are going to want them. So really think about like what's going to keep them out, and when do you need to put them in place, and when can you remove them? We don't necessarily recommend one specific type. You can buy pre-made products online or in stores, and you can also make them with basically anything that's a framing material, and then some sort of cover that has big enough holes to let in light and water, and if you need them, pollinators, but small enough holes to not let in whatever it is you're trying to keep out. Next slide, please.
And I'll add that we'll talk about some of this as well when we, in our next class, about pest control, because sometimes you want some covering during periods when the pests, insect pests, invertebrate pests are attacking your garden. So come back for that.
You know what, do we want to have people answer this in chat, or do we just want to skip this question?
I think let's skip this because we're, I think, running a little slower than we thought, or yeah. So let's skip this for now.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
So next slide, please.
Okay, let's talk about watering. Now you've gotten those plants, you're ready to put them into the soil, and you're thinking about the first thing they're going to need, which is some water. Let me just first say that watering is one of those challenging things about gardening, can be a challenging thing about gardening, that that especially for a new gardener, but once you kind of start really paying attention to your watering, and if you have some basic knowledge about watering, then you can really learn to, water, know what the plants need and provide it effectively for them. So, know that you'll probably make some mistakes, like all of this, and like all gardeners, we make mistakes and then we learn from it. That's just part of it. So next slide. Let's start with some basics, okay? It's really, you want to avoid any overhead watering. So that picture on the top, when I found it, I thought, what a great example of what we really don't want to do as much as possible, because it's inefficient. It loses a lot of water to evaporation, and particularly if you're doing it in the middle of the day, then it's also going where you don't necessarily want the water. It could be encouraging some weeds as well. And then if it's getting the leaves wet, it can be a vector for disease. So mold and various kinds of diseases encourages. Water is one of the essential elements of those diseases. So as much as possible, you want to keep your leaves dry. And you want to choose a time where it will maximize some of those benefits, like the morning is cooler, so any evaporation in your water is going to be slower. And if you do get the leaves a little wet, it's going to dry out more during the day. So, and definitely mulch, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. So next slide. So as Christina said, it's important to think about water as soon as you're putting those seeds and starts in the ground, because to produce really good quality vegetables, the soil must be kept moist during that first early phase of growth, because they need to reach those roots out to get themselves established. So if you've moistened your soil, as Christina mentioned beforehand, and it's at a good moisture content where you feel it's damp, it's moist, but it's not wet, then that's a good time to plant. And then within a day or so after that, you're probably going to want to go in and water again. And those seeds and seedlings are going to dry out quickly again because they haven't really spread those roots out well. So pretty much every day is going to be what is needed for those seedlings. Unless, again, it depends on the water, it depends on the weather, it depends on your soil, and we'll talk about more of these things. But you want to give them, when you water where you've put down seeds, particularly, you want to give it a very gentle spray of water. And you want to think about how deep are those seeds? Am I getting the water down to that depth? And you don't want that soil drying out. And again, for those starts and any other shallow rooted plants, you don't want to pour it over the plant. You want to put the water around the plant. So next slide. Okay, how much water do plants really need while they're growing once you've got them established? Well, generally we say 1 to 3 times a week, and that seems like a wide range, doesn't it? But that's because there's so much dependent on other things like your soil texture, the weather, the depth of the roots that you're trying to feed with your water, you really want to try to think about those roots as you apply water to your plants. You want to try to, and this is, at least for me, when I'm watering, I'm thinking, how deep are those roots now? How much water do I need to put on here to get down to those roots? But let me go back for a minute to that soil texture. Remember that if you have very sandy soil, then your water is going to go through that soil much more quickly. It'll drain faster, and you'll need to water it more quickly, more sooner after that. If it's really clay-like soil, then that's going to hold on to the moisture much more deeply, and that's, there are many negative things about clay soil, but one of the benefits is it holds on to that moisture. And so those crops that are in that clay soil are going to need a little less water. And then, of course, the weather. And again, I think both Christina and I are fairly close to the ocean. So I can go 3-4 days of fog, and I know then that I can kind of reduce the amount of water that I'm putting into the garden, because in fact, that moisture is going to stay in the ground longer than it is if it gets up to 80 degrees, and it's hot and warm. Okay. And then you want that first couple of inches of soil when it starts drying out, that it is time now for you to start watering again. But the best way to do that is to kind of look into the soil, and we'll cover that in a minute. So there's a point that Christina, that I've added here, that the young plants need to stay moist. And then as they get established, you can let them dry out a bit between watering, so that the first couple of inches of soil have dried out. But then again, when it goes into flowering and setting fruit, that's when the plant's going to need even a bit more water again. So watch for that and adjust your watering cycle as necessary. Okay, next slide. Something I forgot to mention on the last slide, but I can say it separately, that it's always best if you can group your vegetables, so depending on the depth of their roots and how much water they're going to need. Now, we can't always do that, but if you can, it's like any other part of your garden. It's always good to have your irrigation plants similarly with similar water needs together. You don't want to put a hydrangea in the middle of a bunch of drought tolerance. You know, you want to make sure that you understand those watering needs of those different plants. So, but if you have your vegetables in a bed where there are some different watering needs, you can try to adapt it depending on how you're watering it. Or you can also know that if you water well enough for the short to medium roots, then the longer roots are going to get the water that they need, because the lower you go into that soil, the more it's going to be hanging on to that moisture for a longer period of time. So this is a visualization thing for me. I have to visualize it. I've started this, years ago, to kind of imagine how long I have to water in order to get, and you'll learn it. You'll learn it in your own soil. You'll begin to understand. Okay, so how will you learn it? By what we're talking about here, measuring your water flow in your soil. Now, one of the easiest ways is sticking your finger in or sticking your trowel in and investigating, how far did that, I watered by hand for, 10 minutes at this level, and how far did the water sink in? So you'd have to kind of be a little scientist here and figure it out yourself and learn by experience, because we can tell you that there are lots of conditions that affect it, but we can't tell you what's exactly going to work for your soil. And again, when we do our demo on Saturday, we can show you some of this as well. And here's a little formula for taking your bucket, set it to a kind of a flow that you would normally use, and put it into run your hose into a bucket and measure the amount. So typically a gallon of water is going to go about 1.5 inches into 1 square foot of soil. Now that's, if you can imagine that larger square foot of soil, and then you can take your trowel and open that up and see, how far did it go in? So again, experiment a little bit. There are also soil testers that you can buy, soil moisture testers. I wouldn't rely on them 100%, but I do think they work a bit with in that first couple of inches of you don't want to stick your finger in, but I think the finger trick works fine for me. Okay, next slide. So this is just an example of how deep the roots are for certain kinds of vegetables. And I won't go through all of this, but it's here now for you to be able to say, okay, if I try to group them, then this is the 6 to 12 inches is going to, the lettuce, the radishes, the cabbages, etc., are going to do well. Note that sweet corn is not very deep. So some of this is surprising. And it also tells you how deep your raised bed needs to be for certain kinds of vegetables as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, how are you going to apply that water? Well, you don't need a fancy irrigation system. You can start with a basic hose and make sure that it's long enough to allow you to get around all of your vegetable beds and to get to the base of those plants, because you don't want to be watering a spray over 3 feet that you can't reach. So make sure your hose goes long enough that you can get around and be able to water right at the base. Be sure to use a good changeable water flow nozzle that can give you both a very gentle spray and adjust to a good flow of water. If you don't want to spray what for my nozzles are called flood or something like that, it's just essentially a flow of water that you can control. Soaker hoses are also a good alternative. The recommended maximum length for these is about 20 to 25 feet. But then again, you're not necessarily having to hold your hose there. It's pretty straightforward. You can you can connect them right to your hose, so they're pretty simple. But it does kind of mean, connecting, etc. And then, of course, the ultimate is putting in some kind of a drip irrigation system, because that's going to be the most efficient. The water is being placed more accurately in the root zone. The water is at a nice steady flow, at a slow rate. There's no waste, and the plant foliage isn't getting wet. So if you can do it, and you can do it in a fairly simple, basic structure, and there's a video here that I've included that is from another Master Gardener organization that has in fact put this together to show you, you know, you do have maybe 4 or 5 parts that you have to include, but it can be pretty basic. And we here in our Master Gardener organization are putting together an irrigation class, and we hope to have it done for this summer, so look for that as well. You know, sometimes the drip irrigation can cost more, but it does last for many years. So it's worth the investment if you can make it. Next slide. Here's some signs of underwatering and overwatering, just to kind of give you a heads up. Again, ways in which you'll kind of learn when something maybe is going a bit wrong. I think most of us know these. So if you're underwatering, you're going to end up with some brownish leaves. The plant will droop. You may even lose some leaves from it. If you're overwatering, the leaves will turn somewhat yellow. So this is one that is a good one to learn, that there's a difference between underwatering and overwatering and what happens to the leaves. Yellowish versus brownish. Now, yellow leaves can also indicate a need for further nitrogen. So just be aware that those signs can mean a couple of different things. But the first one you want to think about is water. Did I water it too much? Did I water it enough? If you feel you're good with that, then you can go on to other problems that it could have created that particular sign. Overwatering can also result in some wilting. So, and just getting moldy or root rot will end up, if your plants are getting waterlogged, they're going to get root rot. So next slide. Okay, this is more just from the perspective of if you want to try to grow vegetables with a little less water. And this is particularly important when we've had some drought years and people have explored, well, how drought tolerant can I get my vegetables? Generally, vegetables aren't very drought tolerant, but if you remember that they need water most during that first period when they're getting established, and then when they're flowering and setting fruit, that can help. You can then reduce during other times and give more water during those periods. Excuse me. There are some vegetables that are a bit drought tolerant. Certain varieties of beans, of peas, of tomatoes, of squash, a melon. Excuse me. You can think about what is grown in the Southwest, and you know, what did the Southwest Indians grow? They did have to water. It's not that they could do it but they could reduce the water needed for those certain vegetables. So that's something you can explore, particularly if you have to cut back on water. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, if you've let the plant grow and it's had some watering problems during the cycle, you will begin to see some issues. And again, we've all seen carrots like that come out of our garden, those of us who've grown carrots. So don't feel badly. That particular sign can be both from not enough water. Carrots typically like to be consistently watered. They don't like to go through dry periods. But that can also be caused by really rocky soil. So different answers to problems. But other things that can be a result of watering problems is flowers not forming or them dropping off. Blossom end rot on squash or cucumbers or melons can partially be covered. It can be caused by water. It could also be caused by some potassium, a lack of potassium, bolting, the premature flowering, and then for some vegetables, and then tomato skins can start to crack if there's not enough water in them. Okay, so next slide. Okay, thinning and weeding. So if you have, go next slide again after that. So if you have put your seeds in the ground and you haven't measured in between, probably because the seeds were too tiny and it was really hard to get them spaced out. Some of us are better at spacing out our seeds than others. I am one that just likes to lay a bunch of seeds down, and then I know that I'm going to have to thin. So thinning can be kind of a challenge and a meditation. It's hard to pull the beautiful little seedlings out of the ground, I know, but you're not going to waste them. You can throw them into your salads, and it's really necessary for the other seedlings that you have there to grow to maturity. So when the plants are 1 or 2 inches tall, or more importantly, have formed their first or second true leaves, is the time to start doing some thinning. Now, true leaves are when a seed first puts out leaves, those are what are called cotyledon leaves. And pretty much you can see on this slide, the largest kind of roundish leaves there are cotyledon. They're a first set. And they almost always look the same, pretty much from one vegetable to another. So when they first come up, you can't really tell what vegetable it is. But it's that second set of leaves then that looks different. And that begins to take the characteristics of that particular vegetable. So this person is starting to thin with only one set of true leaves, and that's okay. You could let them go a little bit longer. Part of what you want to think about is the soil and how you're going to get them out of there. So mostly you can just pull up gently, or you can cut them off at the soil level. If you're going to pull them up gently, and sometimes you can use tweezers or a pliers, a needle nose pliers, but you want to have the soil be easily to lift them out without hurting that root. So again, making the soil somewhat damp will help with that. And it also depends on your type of soil, again, whether you can do that effectively. And as you decide which ones to pull out, you want to think about, okay, which are the most robust, and also which are in a place where you could give the appropriate distance between one and another. Like if it's recommended they be 3 inches apart, then you want to pull out all of them between 2 that are 3 inches apart, as it makes sense. You can take those little seedlings and try to replant them. But if you try that, just make sure you do it within a couple of hours of taking them out. In fact, I'd say within an hour of pulling them out, and do it very gently. So dig the hole, make sure there's plenty of space for that little root to go down, and then gently push the soil around it. Okay, I think we've covered everything there. Thank you. So weeding is another important part of your gardening. If you're in containers, you're going to have fewer weeds, but it's still important to take them out because they are going to compete with your plants. They're competing for sunlight, they're competing for moisture and space for their roots. And the key to successful weeding control is to prevent those weeds is getting them early before they get too established and pulling them out. So pulling them out when they're young and they're easy to remove. And of course, before they flower and spread. So just the goal of hand weeding is try to remove as much of that root as possible so they don't come up again. Again, dampening the soil can sometimes help with that, or using a tool where you can get down under that root. Mulching is a great way to control those weeds. So it also conserves the moisture for the plants. So really recommend mulching around your vegetables. That mulching can actually save about 35% of the moisture in your plants. So that's an important, remember that if you're trying to save water, and make sure that if you don't have to water, if it's hard for you to water frequently, then mulch becomes even more important. So what do you mulch with? Straw is, as you can see there in that picture, is a really good one for vegetables. Notice what I say under that picture, say nay to hay. A lot of people will get hay and straw mixed up. Hay is going to have seeds in it from that grain crop. So stay away from the hay, get the straw. Lawn clippings can also be used if you have lawn and you've cut it, but make sure that you've not used any herbicides on it. Compost is a great mulch, a side mulch. It can get expensive though, so using something, a little bit uh, bigger and just providing that coverage is also a good alternative. Sawdust is another. Yeah, just look around. You'll find mulches in various kinds of structures. Plastic and newspaper can also work, and it's like the mulches that we've talked about here. It's a little harder to apply, and they won't last as long. Now, when you put these products, these organic products, as much as possible around your plants, especially as they get smaller, you're going to eventually, as you work that soil between crops and all, it's going to get folded into the crop. And do remember that some of these kinds of mulches can, as they break down, the breaking down process in the soil pulls some nitrogen out of the soil. So you may in fact want to do some, think about putting in a little bit more nitrogen into your soil and as those break down. And Christina will talk about that in the next section. So I think the next slide, I think we're ready to go back to you, Christina.
All right.
There you
So
go.
I'll be quick because I know I went super over on my first one. So I wanted to talk about feeding your plants. And just to be clear, I was doing my research for this, and the UCANR wants me to let you know that amendments and fertilizers are not technically feeding the plant. The sun feeds the plants, but we think of it as feeding. So it's more of just a turn of phrase. All right, next slide, please. They go into more detail on soil amendment in the previous class, and I've got the links ready to go. I was looking through the comments, so I'm going to post some things in the chat once we're done, which we almost are. But on a basic level, when people talk about fertilizer, they're talking about products that affect the plant growth through their stages of growth through nutrients. And so, and I have another slide on this that I'll go into more detail on fertilizer later. When we talk about soil amendment, we're talking about products that indirectly affect the plants by improving soil physical and chemical properties. So if you look at the list, most of what we call a soil amendment comes down to something that we would basically consider compost. So these are all things that you mix into the soil that it's going to improve the quality of the soil, particularly through having more of the living components in there. Whereas the fertilizers are a little more like directly chemically affecting the plant. Although technically all of them are affecting the soil. So sorry if that was confusing, but I'm going to focus mostly on fertilizer. So next slide, please. Okay, perfect. When we talk about fertilizer, you will usually see the products labeled with an NPK ratio. So the N is for nitrogen, the P is for phosphorus, and the K is for potassium. And I put a link to an article on this slide that has more information on it if you're interested. But the basic idea is that available nitrogen in the soil really promotes leaves and lush green growth. Available phosphorus in the soil really promotes fruit, flowers, and roots. And available potassium is really helpful in root development, strong stems, nutrient transport, and overall plant health. So most of the time, you're actually going to want a fairly balanced NPK ratio, unless you're trying to do something specific. with your summer garden vegetables, you can apply a balanced, slow release organic pelleted or powder fertilizer during the soil prep. Like basically as you're digging the hole, you can put in some of that dry fertilizer that usually comes in a bag. And then you can, depending on what you're planting, you can find ones that have ratios specifically for that crop. There are also some that are promoted as being specific for starts, like specifically helping the roots get started. If you're interested in particular crops, I highly recommend researching that crop. There are some crops where you don't necessarily always want a perfect NPK balance. You might want a little more nitrogen. For example, I mentioned I grow garlic. And so for garlic, I actually do put on blood meal, which is pretty much just pure nitrogen, because in the garlic, you're really trying to get that green leaf development to happen. In general, with vegetables, you will be purchasing fertilizers that are a little bit higher in nitrogen, but it's really important to think about what those goals are. And in terms of applying them, some people apply them when they plant the seeds or the starts. Some people don't, and they wait until there's been some plant development. That decision often relates to how well you amended your soil. So if you just did a ton of work on your soil and it's got a ton of compost in it, then you may not feel the need to fertilize immediately. If your soil is just the ground you're digging in, you might want to throw a little soil in there. And you can also, fertilizer in there.
Mhm.
And you can also get soil tests on your soil that will give you an idea of whether or not you need to apply them. Sorry, Trink, did you want to add to that?
No, I just was agreeing with you that yes, if you've just, I usually put compost into my raised beds before I plant. And so I don't feel the need to add fertilizer right away. But within, 2-3 weeks, I may want to put some side dress, some fertilizer, general fertilizer. Mhm.
Mhm. Which brings me to my next point. In terms of keeping your plants healthy, usually you are, once they've started developing and they're well established and they've used up some of the available nutrients in the soil, you often will get better quality in the growth and in the harvest if you do another fertilizer every few weeks. Usually we wait till whether we chose to do an initial planting or not, once the plants are established and at least 3 or 4 inches high, that's when a lot of times you want to side dress them. A lot of people like to add, once the plant's already in the ground, add liquid fertilizer. It does absorb and become available to the plants immediately. If you are going to use a powdered or pelleted, one way that a lot of people have success is by I think it's called band fertilizing, where you dig a little trench that's a little bit away from the plant, like maybe if you have drip irrigation, for example, like between the plant and the irrigation, or if you have rows of plants, like between the rows, and you sprinkle the fertilizer in there and then cover it with the soil so that the roots can reach to it, but it's not on them. You want to, and I cannot stress this enough, when you are using fertilizer, it was really important to follow the directions from the manufacturer. Excessive fertilizer can burn your plants, and it can do some significant harm to them that can affect the health of the plant and ultimately the harvest you get at the end. And so you really want to make sure that you're not over fertilizing, that you're following the direction on what you bought, which relates to our next slide. So let's go ahead and click to the next slide. So master gardeners in general do not recommend one specific brand or product. So this is just an example of some of what you'll probably see in your local nursery or online. And if you talk to people, different people have their favorites. I actually just use a variety. I'm more concerned with the NPK ratio I'm looking for at the time, and then like kind of what's available or on sale, rather than necessarily being brand loyal. I also like that the down to earth doesn't use plastic in their packaging. Like it's really just a cardboard box, which I kind of like, but again, that's not Master Gardeners recommending it. Like that's just my personal preference. But again, all of these will have directions on them. And so it's really important to make sure that you're following those directions. And that's pretty much all I had on fertilizing.
Okay, well, before we get to your questions, and we are going to, just a reminder that we are going to do a demo of some of these things that we've talked about in our Watsonville demo garden on Saturday. You can register for that online. It's actually a separate class to register for. And we do ask you to register just so we know how many people are coming. And these are some of the things we'll look at: seeds, starts, watering. We'll discuss what's growing there. We'll look at the beds that are there, and you can ask us all kinds of questions. Next slide. And then this is next in our garden series, as I said, pest management in early May. So we'll talk about all those insects and other pests that you need to control, keep out of your vegetable garden. And then in mid-July, we'll just have a questions and problems session. Things should be going well in the garden, but there's always something. So we'll just have you ask the questions and we'll try to answer them. Stump the Master Gardener. And then in September, we'll do a harvesting and storage session. Next slide. And this is really terrific. It is time for our annual Master Gardener plant sale. And we actually are going to take some of the plants. We have, I don't know, I think 10 plants from the sale that we can plant on Saturday. So that will be fun, but it'll also show you the quality of the plants because they are gorgeous. So there's all kinds of vegetables that our Master Gardeners grow. We have a whole team of Master Gardeners that do this practically year round. And we have 2 sales in the spring and in the fall. And this one, of course, a lot of vegetables. So within the next few days, I think, there's going to be a plant list posted on the website. And this is a kind of no contact web sale where you go onto the website, you order, you pay, and then you say where you want to pick your plants up from, and they'll give you a time and a date, and you can come and pick them up. So next slide. Don't miss that. Here are some other classes that are coming up for our Master Gardeners. And there's also a link here on this slide, which we will also put in, which I ask you to kind of link now if you can, if you're on your computer, and save it to be able to answer, because we'd love to get feedback on how we did and what we could do better. So we've got avocados, growing vegetables in San Juan Bautista, regenerative soil techniques. This is a really great class if you want to really build your soil up, and some native gardening, native plant gardening that are coming up. And more will come. Next slide. I think we're at questions now. Next one. There we go. Oh, sorry, one more slide. Just
Oops.
Remember that you can always go to our website, follow the link about how to ask a Master Gardener and submit a question. Take a picture of a plant that you're wondering about, or a problem or a pest or whatever it is. And we have a whole team of Master Gardeners that answer those questions within about 3 days. So look for that. And now we're at questions, I think.
Sorry.
Okay, Tiffany, are you going to throw some questions at us?
Yeah, I think we have about 4 that have come in throughout the conversation. And if there are any further, please feel free to throw them in the chat. So the first one is from Genevieve. I found some cutworm in my raised bed. Should I still plant my seedling?
Okay. You know, I don't get a lot of cutworms, so but I think, and Christina or anybody give some recommendations here. I would say try to go through and pull out. If it's a raised bed, go through it, and there's nothing planted in it now, and pull out as many as you can. And so that's the IP, integrated pest management, is just get rid of them as much as you can. I wouldn't put anything to kill them in at this point. I would go ahead and plant. I'd look for as many as I could. I'd plant, and then I would keep a good eye on them. Christina, what do you think?
So, I did a little looking up,
Oh,
and
did
I
you? Good for
just
you.
posted in the chat an article from UCANR about cutworms, and I also don't really experience them myself, but the recommendations are that you should protect your seedlings with cardboard collars, screen, or protective cloth. And they also recommend just planting more because you probably will still lose them. But I agree with what Trink said about going through. I mean, they're visible. So if you can pull out
Yeah.
as many as you can, that
It's a
might be
start.
your best bet.
It's a start. And then to put the protection is a great idea. Yeah. Good.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, the next question is from Marla. Is the soil too cold for beans? How can we tell without a soil thermometer?
I planted beans about a week ago. They've come up just fine. And I think we're at this point where we're now past frosts and things are warming up, that I would think any of us within this central coast area could plant beans. I wouldn't, Christina, what do you think?
I agree. And if I recall correctly, Marla said she's in Santa Clara, which would be even warmer than we are. So
Yeah.
I think you should be okay.
And if you have any doubt about it, you might try buying some bean starts and then putting some seeds in. Again, that kind of blending starts and seeds is something that I try sometimes when, if we can afford it and you're willing to give it a go, then you can experience, the whole timing of vegetables can get a little easier because you'll get your starts will come out first and then your seedlings, your seeds will take longer. So you'll have more of a timing of fruit.
Yeah, and if you plant seeds, seeds are pretty good about just not coming up until they're ready. So even if it is a little cold, it'll just come up a little bit later. So
Yeah.
I do not see anything on my initial search of ANR about soil temperature without a soil thermometer. So I don't have any good tips for that. I know there are people who warm their soil through solarization, so if they want to get a jump start, but that seems like not what your question is. So
Yeah. Okay, Tiffany.
We have another question related to planting things such as lettuce and kale in conditions that might need a little bit more shade. So the question is it possible to plant lettuce and kale underneath a raised planter container?
Raised planter container. I'm not sure that I understand that question. What you
So
could
like one of those Costco ones maybe that where it's on wheels, so there's space underneath. Is that what we're talking about?
does the person who asked that want to come on and tell us?
I think that was B.
That was what?
Oh,
B?
let's see.
A person named B?
Yes, yeah, she says yes, similar to that. A few feet off the ground.
Okay. So there's, I think, and Trink, you can jump in too. I think that with kale, that is going to protect them. And, but I think also that, part of it is also the air temperature. The warmer it is in the air, the more likely you are to get like aphids and other pests. And so I think that is going to be better, but I still think you're going to need to keep an eye out for pests.
Yeah, and they're also a lot of people try to grow taller vegetables and then put things like lettuce, spinach, kale that might not want quite as much sun in the side of those taller vegetables that's going to get less sun. Or for people who kind of grow a big tall, put on a big tall support for certain vegetables, so then you can grow the lettuce or the kale underneath, again in a little more shady. So I think Christina and I are pointing out two different things here. One is, the how much sun they get versus, and also how many pests they bring. So Again, I'd experiment with it in different parts of your garden. I've done that to kind of see, okay, well, will I grow it here and I only get maybe 4 hours of sun here? Will they do okay? Things like that. Again, for me, we are, with being so close to the ocean, I don't worry. I really am fine growing kale all year long, practically. They get big and heavy sometimes in the winter, but they're fine. So experiment.
Mhm.
Tiffany?
All right, we have our final question for tonight. Any suggestions for quail that burrow in the dirt of my garden?
um, I get quail in my garden as well, but I have bird feeders, so they're just coming to pick up the leavings from the birds, and they don't cause me any problem really because it's not in my vegetable bed. Um, but certainly, what does come into my vegetable bed is the bunnies that come in. And of course, those birds that are eating from my feeders are then going over to nibble on all my lettuce. So I really do, especially this time of year, as I put in starts and seeds, I need to cover all my beds to prevent the birds, or quail is a bird, from going in and trying to uncover any seeds that are under there. So I would say find a way, to cover your beds. And it can be something as simple as sticks around the bed and a big piece of tulle or other kind of cloth. There's cloth, made just for garden beds. Tulle is something you can buy at fabric stores. It's like bridal veil. It allows both the sun, the moisture in, and it can also conserve some water because it can create condensation under the fabric. So look, and then of course there are a zillion things you can buy online that are perfect covers for your beds. But be creative and find ways. Your vegetables will grow even under those covers. And for the first few weeks, as you're getting your seeds and your starts established, you really do need to protect them from all those things that just love the taste of little fresh vegetables.
I'm going to say I have a lot of quail in my yard as well.
Oh, good.
And maybe what you're talking about is how they like to come and take little dust baths rather than eat your plants. Because we don't have any problem with them eating the plants. They just like to, they've got a little, they're literally watched them this afternoon taking dust blasts in an area that I don't care about, but they do sometimes get close. So really it ends up for us, we just set some kind of barrier up. So kind of like maybe just a wire ring, of like hardware cloth or something like that, just to keep them from getting super close to your plants. That's probably the same kinds of things that you use for the bunnies, but I don't think the cloth would help if that's what your issue is, because they'll just come and dig around in that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Marla just had a question here about, and you've answered it, Christina. Yes, be careful about bird netting. It can actually net birds.
Yeah, I don't think that would be as much of a concern wrapping it on your planter. I'm not sure. I don't know. I have really voracious squirrels, and
Yeah.
I don't know if they would rip it or dig through it because I've never used it. So it could be effective. You'd probably want to remove it once your plants are established, but then you may not need it once your plants are established anyway.
Yeah, and again, I think one of the best ways to get ideas of how to protect what to put around your beds to protect them is to go online and look at some of the things that are made specifically for this and can be really expensive, but and explore other people online. And it's a great way to get ideas. You can Google ways to protect your plants for not very much money, or whatever, and I think you can find lots of different ideas, and then just start being creative yourself. As much as sticking bamboo in and covering it, I was able to buy some metal pieces that just kind of, it's like a tent. It's like a piece of a tent you know, where how you're putting a tent up and you have to put all of the metal little pieces together, and then when they come down and they all come apart. It's a similar kind of thing that I can stretch out and open up all the way with the metal piece and put it over the bed, and then put some material over that. So just ways, you know, something as simple as old colanders are work as well as cloches, you know, that you buy. So yeah, yep, creativity is what it is.
One of the tricky things with giving an official Master Gardener answer is most of what we're sharing is research based, and there's just not as much research on raised beds. Most of the research is on, you know, farmland just in the ground. And so, I mean, that's even why I think somebody commented that we had plastic listed as a mulch. Really, that's mostly in farmland, in like the straw, like if you go past strawberry fields, like not a lot of people use that in their, you can, but not a lot of people use that in their yard. And I think it's a similar issue with talking about what would you do to protect a raised bed. There's just not a lot of studies on it. And so it's kind of what everybody's tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
one other question that popped into the chat a little bit above. Is there a local supplier in Santa Cruz for bulbs and corms?
I am not aware of one.
Any particular kind of bulbs, like vegetable? I wonder. Yeah, not specifically for that. I mean, you can try the nurseries. We have some great nurseries in Santa Cruz, and you could ask them.
Oddly, Costco often has quite a few. You might have missed them, but they have a big selection at certain times of the year.
They do still have some, but it's a limited selection right now, at least the Santa Cruz one.
All right.
I saw a question come up about exposure to wind and full sun. And my answer to that would be putting up some sort of barrier. So sometimes people will put you can make them out of PVC. They'll put the hoops over their raised beds, and then you can cover that with a shade cloth, which won't keep out all of the wind, but it'll keep out some of the wind, and it'll keep out some of the sun, which sounds like it might help with some of that. I mean, I am also a similar distance from the ocean, but I just don't have that kind of wind or sun. Honestly, it's very foggy in Santa Cruz.
Right.
But shade cloth can really be helpful.
Yeah, shade cloth can be helpful. It's question too of which vegetables are being burned by the sun, because a lot of vegetables can do really well with that kind of sun. So you have to look at what the needs of that particular vegetable are. You know, some are going to need a little bit more shade, some are going to need more sun.
And that could also relate to something Trink said earlier about thinking about where you plant tall versus small plants. Because if you have taller plants around, those can actually protect some of the smaller plants. I don't know if you're talking specifically about the leaves or I mean, it's kind of early to be the fruit. But I know that really some people aggressively prune their plants, and that can be harmful to the fruit. So both tomatoes and peppers kind of want the leaves to protect the fruit from too much sun. So I'd also make sure you're not pruning.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And I'm sorry we've gone a bit over on this one, but they were great questions and we had so much to tell you. So do please come on Saturday if you can. If you have other questions, we can answer them then. And sign up for our next one on pests. That'll be even more fun. Talk about this, guys.
That class is already listed on our website too. So if you're ready to sign up for the following class, go ahead and take a look for that. The other ones will be up soon.
Oh, well, if for people who are still on here, I did a little research while Trink was talking, and I'm just going to post some things in the chat really quickly. So if you had a question that didn't get answered, I'm posting a couple of things really quickly. So just check to see if any of those links relate to things you were looking for. Because I scrolled through, and so somebody asked about companion planting, which also doesn't have a ton I had an answer for somebody who asked about crop volume, and that's it depends. I don't have a direct answer without knowing what the crop is. Somebody asked for tomato recommendations for a coastal area. I posted a link.
Great.
And then, list of veggies. There is a list in our slides, but I also posted the link here. So
Yeah. And you always
When,
have,
oh,
you
go
always
ahead.
have our Ask a Master Gardener too. They're happy to answer any questions for you.
All
Great.
right. I'll be sending out a link to the recording for this as well as for the presentation. And I will make sure that we've got some of the links that Christina just added right there in the email that you'll receive. So keep an eye out for that. And I hope wishing you all happy gardening. And I don't know if you can see my screen. It is not actually natural, but I hope you can grow some of the gigantic vegetables in my AI
Generated garden.
generated garden here, because wow, we eaten tomatoes for I don't even know, multiple meals, one tomato already. Anyway, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you supporting us Master Gardeners. We do what we do because of you. Oh, that kind of rhymed, didn't it? Anyway,
Yep,
hope to
good.
see you on Saturday.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, I see another question just came up. I don't know if
Oh.
she's still there. Oh, yeah, you're still there. We don't necessarily recommend a specific place to get bulk ingredients, but usually you can get it through your local municipal what do you call it? Is it green waste?
Green
What is
waste.
it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like they have bulk compost and some of the soil. It looks like somebody posted Aptos Landscape Supply.
Yeah.
There's also landscape, like I know I'm in Santa Cruz, and there's like Central Home Supply. You can
Yeah.
get bulk. I'm sure there's other places as well. Do you guys have suggestions?
Those are the ones I don't think our local landfills do a bulk anymore, sadly. Our Watsonville one used to, but I don't think Santa Cruz does, or Watsonville anymore. So
Oh no.
Oh, the Santa Cruz site closed, it looks like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's true. Central Home is only the Scotts Valley location. The Santa Cruz site is
Yep.
now an intersection. So
Yeah. Okay.
I can look into whether our green waste or whatever the dump still offers compost enough. I'll again put that in the in your letter when we
Okay,
get there.
great.
So. All
Okay.
right.
Bye
All right.
again.
Thank you all. Good evening.